Dr. Nisha Khanna, welcome back to Ayurvedic Healing and Beyond. So happy to have you back.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back here.
Doctor, I think the last time we did the podcast, it was 3 years ago during the peak COVID when I started my podcasting journey. And now I have new listeners, so I would love for them to hear your story. You're a internist, a board certified allopathic practitioner, and at the same time you believe in Ayurveda and you see how it is impacting your patients by integrating Ayurveda also into your practice. Now, what was your story coming from an allopathic background and then embracing and integrating Ayurveda?
Yeah, so I think I always felt disconnected from internal medicine because it didn't seem to resonate and offer deep root healing. There were many pathologies, many diagnoses that were just considered idiopathic, which means we don't know, but let's give it a name. And so I had been practicing Ayurveda for myself as just like a patient of Dr. Vasant Lad in New Mexico. And I had been seeing him since I was 16. And so even though I studied Western medicine, internal medicine, went through the whole process with medical school and residency, I kept referring back to Ayurveda to treat myself. And I would, I read his book, The Science of Self-Healing, and I just found so much depth and so many answers to questions about my own self, my mind-body state in that book. And so there was a bit of a disparity or a disconnect because I was practicing medicine and I was good at it, but it wasn't the medicine I would use for myself. I would lean on Ayurveda. So I wanted to find a way to connect the two, and it didn't seem possible at the time when I was going through medical school and residency. That was early 2000s. So there was no integrative medicine as a modality back then. It didn't exist, or if it did, it was very undercover and very covert. And so if it had existed, I would have studied that instead of internal medicine. I would have gone into integrative medicine, but it didn't. And so I had to sort of chart my path to figure out how can I marry these Eastern and Western modalities in my own being and in my own practice, what I share with patients. And so that took me down essentially putting a pause on my medical career. I had been maybe working for 5 years. I had worked initially in hospitals as their hospitalist doctor, seeing cardiac patients and GI patients and really just intense hospital setting. And then I went into more of an outpatient practice. However, there were certain personal life impetuses that prompted me to basically put a pause on all of that medical practitioner in the Western model and just say, okay, I'm going back to school. And I went all the way back to Dr. Lad and went to go study with him as a student for 2 years. And it was a big break, essentially, and a very pivotal, important break for me because not many people, or maybe they do more so these days, but not many people are, in a thriving practice where they're essentially getting paid, a good salary and say, okay, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to actually go be a student again and not earn any money. And so it was really just a choice of passion. I don't think we can put a value on the thing that lights our spirit up. And so no amount of money could compensate for feeling purposeful. And when I went to go study Ayurveda, I immediately had all of this sense of passion and purpose awakened that this was what I was meant to share. And so my journey in integrating the two was stepstoning into functional medicine after I finished my Ayurvedic training. And that felt more resonant because they were focusing on the gut, and I could essentially mirror that concept with Agni and be like, okay, this is making sense. They're saying kind of the same thing, and they're thinking about how food affects you and your sleep and your mood and everything that Western medicine up until what I had known just pushed under the rug and slapped a prescription on. So it felt more aligned. And then I found some of the pitfalls in functional medicine, which was essentially a lot of expensive testing, a lot of supplements, and thinking from an Ayurvedic lens, it's like, okay, can an individual actually digest all of that? It's not just what we eat or what we put in our body, but our Agni's ability to metabolize it. So I didn't feel completely resonant there either, but I did draw from it to kind of pick the best of that and marry it with Ayurveda, so that essentially when I work with someone, I am working through the Ayurvedic lens of the doshas and the dhatus and samprapti, and at the same time have enough knowledge of supplements and functional testing that I can integrate that where I feel is necessary. So in my current practice, I do just that. I incorporated additional mind-body practices, and I do some Vedic acupressure, marma, and essentially have combined all of what I've learned over the years to create these very integrative treatment plans where if a patient needs hormonal therapy or an antibiotic for an acute infection, I'm not going to say, let's just slap some herbs on it. But using those very judiciously, and also making sure that we're addressing the deepest roots through the lens of Ayurveda. How did that dosha start to accumulate? How can we bring it back to the gut for elimination? All of that. So a very long answer to your question, but I guess it has been a long journey over the past 10 years or so. And so that's where I am today.
What a fantastic story that you have. Dr. Nisha, so if I were to, be a devil's advocate to ask you, I mean, you have antibiotics, you have painkillers, you have steroids, you have some of the best medications that numb the pain and the symptoms. But at the same time, what is that thin line that you draw to see, okay, this is where you need to follow Ayurveda, but this is where you need to take these medications, like the allopathic medications. Where do you draw that line? Now, why I'm asking, I see people, so there is a group that is polarized. People are like, oh, I will never take allopathic medicines. On the other hand, you have this allopathic followers. They are like, I will never use any of these herbs. These are pseudoscientific. There's no randomized double-blind study to prove its efficacy. How on earth can you take that? And you see the world polarized in these two, like the Republicans and the Democrats, or in India we have this. So they only just say what is bad and that, but they're not trying to understand what the other did something good about it. So where would you draw the line? Where to use this medications of allopathy, and where do you really embrace Ayurveda and get into your life?
That's a really good question. I think it happens very organically when I work with a patient. It is specific to each case. Generally, if someone is on a list of 10 prescriptions when they come to me, that has happened, then I'm not going to take them off everything cold turkey. Essentially, what I would do in that situation, I'd start introducing some very restorative practices, things that restore their Agni, their digestion, decreasing the load on digestion, decreasing the Amma burden, the toxicity burden. And as I do that, the prescriptions start to fall off. And I don't even necessarily guide it. Sometimes they're just like, I feel so good. I took myself off everything but these two things. And I'm not advocating for that. I think it should be done under the guidance of a practitioner. But I have noticed that as you start to work on these key pillars of digestion, sleep, energy that are all tied together, that the need for prescription medication decreases. And And so that's how I typically would work with someone if they're coming to me on prescriptions. I'll give you an example of a patient I worked with eczema. So it was her first visit coming to see me, and she had very full-blown eczema on her leg. And it was like the kind of situation where she should have seen me months ago, but she didn't want to do any allopathic medicine. So she was just trying to put Ayurvedic herbs on her leg that she had heard about. And so she was doing everything naturally. So it was kind of an intense first visit because it's like, okay, this is really far gone. And at the same time, I wanted to support her choice to only work from a Ayurvedic perspective. And so I saw her on a Monday, and I think 4 days later, she sent me an email with a picture of her leg, and it was overtly swollen and had an oozing crust on it that was typical of a cellulitis, a bacterial infection of her leg, that superficial yellow crust. And I was like, your leg is infected. If we don't do something allopathic about it, this could spread to your bloodstream, cause sepsis, and be fatal at the end if you just don't treat an over-infection. There's some small infections that you can do, like some Ayurvedic paste on, but with such a large area of involvement, there really wasn't another way around it without.
You have to use
because it's an acute situation. Her leg is swollen, and that leads to a whole other list of diagnoses that are possible. Maybe there's a blood clot there. Okay, do we need to rule that out? All of those things that we do in Western medicine, sometimes out of extreme precaution, but it is a possibility because blood clots, if they move to the heart, can be fatal too. So heart or lungs. And so in that situation, I had only seen her 4 days before, but I prescribed her an antibiotic, and we got the infection under control. She saw her primary doctor eventually, who did the ultrasound of her leg to rule out a blood clot, which was protocol. And then I said, okay, now let's go back and, really get your diet online. We'll do a gut reset. We'll, reset your microbiome. And we're going to use some Ayurvedic herbs that you'll take internally. And we're going to do a Virachana later. But we had this whole Ayurvedic plan to help her over a course of a few months. But it wasn't the option in that moment. We needed to do the antibiotics. And so I think you bring up a really good point. It's very important to be able to navigate that territory. And I think if you just leave it up to a patient, it could really lead to some harm. And that's what they actually depend on a doctor for, an integrative doctor, someone who knows what are the situations that absolutely do need allopathic treatment, and where can we continue to work on the Ayurvedic processes that may take a little longer.
I think now I'm curious to talk about your book, because I think you just summarized your practice. That's what happens. And you talk about in your book, I think the title of the book is When the West Meets the Eastern Medicine, if you could.
Yeah, it's Return to Center.
Okay.
East meets West Medicine.
Okay.
An integrative medical guide to healing. And actually that eczema patient that I just mentioned, she's in the book.
Okay.
So it's organized in terms of, kind of like the Ayurvedic basics that most people who are interested in Ayurveda have some familiarity with. And I summarize those concepts quickly because I want to take Ayurveda to a deeper level of self-healing so that if it's really great to work with a practitioner, but not every practitioner will take you to the level of the depth that maybe you're curious or interested in. And so this book offers that through the lens of Ayurvedic anatomy and the dhatus. And so I organized it according to the 7 dhatus, rasa, rakta, mamsa, meda, on and on. And so this eczema patient, I placed her at the end of the Rakta chapter because we see eczema as a combination of Ama, but also elevated Pitta and Rasa and Rakta. And so essentially how I organized the book was through the lens of the dhatus. So the 7 dhatus talk about how to support each dhatu, but then give an example of a patient that illustrates how I worked with them to essentially take that person from where they came to see me to, pretty radical healing, and typically within the span of a few months. And so highlighting how that can be applied to each dhatu.
I see. Doctor, I see that you have written about this Ama and Agni. Now, coming from a Western medical background, how would you describe from that language what is Agni and what is Ama?
Yeah, there's such profound concepts that sometimes it's hard for English to really capture, because it's like, well, Agni means like 4 or 5 different things, or maybe even more. It even has spiritual layers to it. And then in the West, we just try to put one word to it. It can be hard, but the way that I explain it in the book is that Agni is essentially your metabolic ability to transform. So, very rudimentary way of thinking of that is digestive capacity, digestive power. And then another kind of way to explain Ama is essentially toxicity, which leads to inflammation. So essentially, sometimes I'll interchange it with the word toxicity or inflammation.
I see. Now, we see that, when the Agni gets hampered, the production of Ama can be high. That's what we read in the Ayurvedic textbooks. Now, do you see that when the metabolism goes low, the toxicity level goes high? Or would you say toxicity is something that is coming from the outside, or it's also, there is an inherent inability to process the food that we consume that can also lead to this Ama?
Yeah, I feel like there's an interplay between the two always. And Ama is coming from every avenue. It's coming from the pesticides in food. It's coming in through the heavy metals in the environment, in the water that we drink, in the air that we breathe. That's all Ama. It's things that the body needs to do something with, because it's foreign material, essentially, that the body's like, well, how do I transform this into something I can use? And it takes a toll on digestion. And that is one of the natures of Ama. And so we get Ama from all these avenues, but then there's this bi-directional highway between the mind and the body. And so when we feel good in our body, we feel healthy, then our mood is good. And we're happy and we're joyful and we're like, what's next? But then when we don't feel good internally, maybe we have an infection, diarrhea, gut infection, something's going on, our mood goes down too. And we see this with different probiotic strains and bacterial strains in the gut are correlated with mood. Some correlate with anger, some correlate with anxiety, and there's research on this. And so essentially there's this highway that's happening. So Ama is being created in the mind too. And so when we're not feeling our best, then we're creating even more Ama, and then that takes its toll on digestion. And you can see that when, say, you're emotional and something's going on, you can look at your tongue the next day and you can see more Ama on your tongue because you didn't digest that well that day. And it doesn't mean that emotions are bad and you should push them aside. It's more that they do need to be processed as well. And so they take a toll on Agni. And so Ama's coming from everywhere. And I feel like, it's influenced by genetics to a degree as well. But when we come in as children, we've got these clean tongues. And typically if there aren't a lot of external influences that decrease the Agni can stay strong if it's supported. But I feel like most people inherently have a good Agni, but through practices that come out of unawareness of how to support Agni, it gets dampened with time, And I just imagine that if there were more parents sharing with their children from a young age, about food combining principles and not having, ice cold beverages with their food or, that much outside of it either, how different our, the generation of children would be in terms of their health. So there's a lot of influences and they interact.
I think when you're talking about, when we're not able to process our emotions, that also create armor. Recently, I read a meme. A lady, she was suffering with severe gut health problems because she got stressed because of something, because of her mental health issues. So she wanted to tell the mental health, I want to tell this mental health to go stand in line on the mental health. Don't enter my gut. I don't want you to influence my gut. So how this is interconnected?
Well, I mean, it's actually the gut is influencing her mental health.
It's like chicken and egg sometimes, or catching the tiger's tail.
Yeah, you're right. That's that bidirectional highway. It's like both are happening, and that's why IBS is so much. Like that's why they prescribe antidepressants for IBS, because they're recognizing the influence of emotions on the gut.
So, Doctor, you, by the way, I just want to tell you about the word Ama. One of my teachers, I was discussing about, etymologies of, in Sanskrit, we call Nirukti of Ama. So there are multiple ways you can dissect the word Ama. So one of them is, he was telling, the word Ma, it actually comes from the source. It means source, like Mama means me or mine. In English, mine, me, mother, all of this comes from the source. And A is like negating that which is not me. So anything that you consume which is not able to integrate with yourself in a good way, it becomes a potential Ama.
Oh, wow. That's so good. Yeah. I remember that from Sanskrit negates it, but I never thought of it as Ma, which is everything that you are, the universe.
Same like arogya, like roga and arogya, like absence of that.
Yeah.
So anything that you consume or process or hear, if you're not able to process it and blend it in internally, then that becomes a potential free radicals.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Doctor, you talk about samprapti. You just mentioned about the word samprapti. Now, samprapti, in a layman's language, it's like the evolution of the disease that we call. But coming from a Western perspective, and then you see about the sampraptis that are mentioned in Charaka Samhita and the Ayurvedic textbooks. Where do you see this? Do you think they have a lot of similarity, or you think it's quite different? Or something is, in some aspects, you can actually look at samprapti, in some aspects, maybe you should not look at samprapti, certain diseases, for example.
I think samprapti is the most important thing to look at with disease, no matter what lens you're coming from, East or West. I just feel that the Western lens is limited in terms of how deep it goes with samprapti. They've gone as far as saying that the gut is the root of disease. And they've gone so far as recognizing that the mind, the mental state influences disease. But what I think the beauty of Ayurveda is that it takes samprapti beyond just the gut, but dissects it into the doshas and the process of where they are in the gut and how they accumulate and how the early signs manifest of those doshas before they even start moving into the circulation. So because Ayurveda offers that layer of specificity to disease pathogenesis, I feel that it takes it deeper than what the West can go at this point. And so in the West, we hear a lot of root cause healing. Let's do a stool test. Let's do a gut test. Let's, see somebody in functional medicine. And I think that's really great. It's so much better than the medical training I grew up with. However, there's more to it. And when you understand samprapti through the lens of Ayurveda, it's not just about diagnosis and recognizing early signs, but then you know how to actually address that accumulated dosha so that you can bring it back to balance. And, we do that through some herbs and practices, but the most important process in that is panchakarma, because it will bring that dosha back to its home in the gut, its respective home, whether it's kapha in the stomach, pitta in the small intestine, vata in the colon, brings it back, and then has the specific practice on how to eliminate that excess dosha, whether it's through bastis, enemas, whether it's through rachana in the small intestine, or whether it's through vamana, induced vomiting in the kapha in the stomach. So that is the deepest layer of retrieving the dosha and actually leading to a potential cure that I don't believe the West has access to at this point.
I think it will get there. It's just that when we are married to the idea that, only if it can be proved in the laboratory, I think once you step out of that and look at it a little more openly, then it will reach there, I guess.
I've always found that there's so much bias in research in general. So, I mean, even doing my own research papers when I was a college student, you can basically pick any point, any position, and try to prove it, and organize the variables or whatever to make the result look a certain way. And I'm not saying all research is like that, but it is a big influence. And I think we need to look at this idea of research and placebo-controlled, double-blind, randomized, ... with a grain of salt, that even those things have the bias of the person who's creating the experiment and doing the experiment, and that conceived of it, the conception of it. There's conception bias. And so I agree with you. And I don't actually think that Ayurveda is something that's not scientifically proven, because it stands the test of time, and it stands the test of actually working.
When people say it's not scientifically proven, I would say it is not scientifically proven in the current laboratories that are trying to prove the randomized control studies. But there are other ways it was proved. And yes, just because it lasted for 5,000 years doesn't mean that it's only because it is, people question, is it only because it's working? Sometimes even the wrong misbeliefs can continue for a very long period. But at the end of the time, people see results. When I say I'm an Ayurvedic doctor, I call myself, I'm the doctor for the leftover patients. Patients who tried all the allopathic system and they give up. And it's not like they're coming because they are afraid of allopathic medicine. They tried it and they got frustrated and they said, this is not helping me. And it's like they come to us as a last straw hope. But at the same time, sometimes they come at the last phase. Sometimes they come at a phase where we can really help them. So I'm sure you will see it. And the fact that you do the integrative method, you're in a much better position to help them with both sides. We know where to give which situation is best for this and which is best for Ayurvedic medicines. So I think the future, the hybrid model is going to be the future, I think.
Yeah. And I do want to also point out that there is a lot of scientific research supporting Ayurveda, more and more coming out.
Yes, definitely, yes.
And I do highlight some of that in my book, but I'll give you a few examples. So there's actually many examples, but one of the ones that's the most compelling is that, how in Ayurveda, so much of how we prescribe treatment recommendations is based on the taste, the rasa. So, for example, for a kapha imbalance, we're going to favor astringent, bitter, and so they've actually found taste receptors all over the body. And I just think that is fascinating that they actually called them taste receptors. And they, not just on the tongue, but on the heart and in the blood and, in all our organs. And so it makes so much sense that, okay, well, those lighter tastes are having an impact on the liver. When you think of fatty liver, and we think of that as a kapha condition, if you introduce more bitter and astringent, and pungent, you're going to have better results because there's actually taste receptors now. And so there's so many examples of that I review, and I just think it's fascinating. And like these days, for example, with kapha conditions, oftentimes in Ayurveda we'll prescribe some apple cider vinegar to be taken in the morning. And now it's such a common, like, everybody is recommending taking vinegar before high glycemic meals because they found the scientific research that said that, facilitates the AMP kinase reuptake of glucose. And so essentially sensitizing those cells to glucose, and so that it's not circulating in the bloodstream, so that it doesn't create as big of a blood sugar spike. And we've been saying that in Ayurveda forever, and now we have the research. So I think sometimes it's a matter of the research just kind of catching up to what is tried and true. It's funny that sometimes I'll go to these functional medicine conferences where they're saying research now shows that you should have your largest meal at noon and you should follow the circadian cycle because we now have research that shows that if you go outside in the morning, it programs your hypothalamus and pituitary to secrete its circadian hormones for the day. And that improves your cortisol and testosterone and melatonin, and everything works the way it's supposed to. But we've been, promoting that in Ayurveda for so long that just mirror your environment, follow the sun cycle, and so I think in some ways it's just a matter of things catching up too, and potentially finding the research so that you can say like, hey, like here it is.
I'm now curious to know more about the book. What are your key takeaways that you offer in the book?
Key takeaways?
Yes.
Well, I think the first 3 chapters are essentially the principles that to live your life by through Ayurveda, through the lens of Amama, Agni. And I called them, the book is called Return to Center. And so I call them the 3 pathways to the center. It's what you eat, so what goes in, what goes out, Ama, elimination. And I talk about the major pathways of elimination, and then what gets transformed, Agni. And so those are the pathways to return to center. And so I think that's the foundational part of the book. And so if you were to implement just what's in those first 3 chapters, you could make huge strides in your health. And then I think what separates this book from potentially most Ayurveda books that I've seen is that we go deeper and we go into the dhatus. And there are key takeaways for each dhatu, how to support it, how to support your rasa. And I think as a population, we're all very concerned with rasa because it influences our skin, our complexion, the glow. And so there's details on how to support each dhatu and then what to do to bring each dhatu back into balance whenever it's out of balance. And so that is illustrated with patient cases that really just kind of give you a good sense of, oh, okay, this is how this knowledge is actually applied. And I think what I love most about the book is that it's so user-friendly. It's not a boring book that, you just like can't get through and you wish there was an audio book for. It's a beautiful book that is like color printed on nice paper and got pictures and diagrams, and the way it's set up is it's so easy to digest these concepts. And I think being an Ayurvedic doctor and being so interested in digestibility, I brought that quality into the book. Like, how can I make this digestible so that people want to consume this and they actually retain the information? And so I'm also an artist. And so I added my own art into the book too. And so I'll just show you a quick example, but it's just very pretty. We talk about sattva, rajas, tamas, and then I have some of my like alcohol ink art populating the book. And so I think it's user-friendly. there's key takeaways with each chapter. It goes deeper into Ayurveda than I have seen most books go. And so I kind of like to describe it as the beautiful coffee table book that you want to set out and you want to flip through, but it's also a very easy to digest textbook.
Mm. That's fantastic. I'm curious to, they say that you write the book that you want to read.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's good. Well, I'll send you a copy.
Do you connect with that statement? Do you write the book that you want to read?
Yeah, I speak personally that I actually don't read a lot of books. Like I do try to multitask as much as I can. And I have a dog, so I'll walk my dog and I'll listen to some audios sometimes. So it's not often that I actually sit down with a book and read it, but there's something very nostalgic about doing that. It almost like lets the universe know that you are taking time for yourself and you're going to do just one thing and be fully absorbed in that. It's almost like I think to sit and read a book these days is a marker of leisure. It means I am on relaxed time because, you go to the pool and you read a book, you take a book on vacation, and so in that way, I think there is a really beautiful part of a book, of having a hardback book, something in print that almost is like a marker of I'm going to do some real self-care right now and be present for a change. Do one thing.
Is your book already launched or it's in the pre-launch state?
It launches September 6th.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure when this episode will be released, but September 6th is launch day.
Okay. So do you have the Kindle version also, or it's just the hard copy?
Yeah, I mean, I do have all three versions. So I have Kindle, paperback, hardback, and my preference is the hardback because it's got the nice quality paper and it's, really pretty. But all the information is there on the Kindle. You just lose the aspect of
that paper, yes.
The things I talked about. Yeah.
And
you're going to be looking at a screen if you get the Kindle. We don't like screens, right?
Thank you, Dr. Nisha. It was wonderful talking to you. Now, can you just talk about the name of the book and how people can find it, and also how people can reach out to you? Do you still do online consultations, or you have booked, or you take new patients?
Yeah. So the book is called Return to Center. And it's available on Amazon on September 6th. And I do see patients still in person. I have some online programs where patients can work with me indirectly through my courses. I have one really amazing one to heal leaky gut. And then I have some Ayurveda courses as well, like a foundations course, as well as a beauty and rituals course. And they're called courses, but they're essentially programs that are self-paced. And so actually I have an offer with the book that anybody that purchases the book within the first 2 weeks of the launch will get my gut reset 30% off, and will receive my gut healing recipes download for free. So that's within the first 2 weeks of launching. And so, yeah, I really enjoy working with patients one-on-one in person. Texas law, I'm in Texas, basically states that we need to have that first visit in person. So the more remote online way of working with me is through my programs that I mentioned, my healing programs. But yeah, I'd love to see patients in person if that's, feasible. Yeah. So I'm going to just tell you real quick a little bit about the cover of this and why I chose these colors. I actually haven't talked about that yet. So I don't know if you can see it from far away, but I actually have the elements, air, water, fire, earth, around this geometry. And those
looks
are
like Sri Yantra.
Yeah, it does. And so because that diagram, the Sriranta, actually is like a focal point in the center. So I just felt like it was appropriate for the title. And then the elements map to where the Vastu directions are for the elements. So I thought that was fun. And the colors are this red and this violet. And I think if you think about the chakra system, the violet at the top and the red at the bottom, when we merge the two, we come to center. And then the title of the book. So you've got this compass with the directions and the yantra and then the colors, and everything's about the return to center. And the reason I chose that title was it is the center of the body, the gut, the Agni, right in the middle, where everything, all disease, begins, and also the pathway to healing. But also, when we get healthy, when we really achieve our highest health and well-being, we are grounded, rooted within ourselves, and able to think about what's next and what gifts do I have that I really enjoy diving into, and those then become your offerings to the world. And so one of the purposes of this book is to activate people to their highest well-being, so that they are beyond their health and they think, now what? Now what relationships can I build? What do I want to create? What is going to be my offering? And that can show up in different ways. It doesn't mean something that you launch out into the world, but it's your being becomes your offering, whether it's in your family relationships or your community or other more typical ways. So yeah, I really feel like that's the essence of Ayurveda as I learned it, is that we get healthy so that we can actually connect more to our spirit. And what does the spirit in this limited time, in this limited body, want to offer into the world?
Fantastic, Doctor. I look forward for the launch and wishing you the best success, and let readers read and get enlightened with it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always so great to talk to you.
Yes, fantastic. I think we should do another episode on leaky gut when you get the next time.
I would love that. I could talk effortlessly on it.
Thank you, Doctor. Wish you a good day.
Okay, you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.